Welcome back to the deep dive. Our mission here is, well, it's simple really. We take these complex foundational sources, strip away all the dense academic jargon, and just deliver the essential insights you need.
The goal is for you to walk away feeling truly informed.
Exactly. Not just like you've read a summary,
Yeah.
but that you get the structure, the clarity. We're always chasing those, those aha moments.
And today we're facing a really fascinating intellectual challenge. Usually we come to the table with a stack of reports, maybe some conflicting articles or these vast research papers.
Like a whole library of stuff.
This time our entire source material boils down to, well, the metadata of a single really powerful document.
Yeah, we're looking at the title, the author, and the cover art of Aqidat al Mu'min.
Or, in English, The Creed of the Believer, by an author named Abu Bakr al-Jaza'iri.
And that's our entire playground. I mean, we don't have the explicit, 500 pages of text in front of us.
Yeah.
But in the world of these foundational texts, the cover, it tells a surprisingly detailed story.
It really does. The title, the authority implied by the author's name, that striking iconography, those are the keys.
So our objective today is pure scholarly deduction. We're going to analyze this metadata, the language, the visuals, the names, and try to reconstruct the cultural gravity, the theological function.
And the structural promise of this text for its intended reader.
We're essentially reverse engineering the belief system that's being promised right there on the cover.
It's an exercise in what you could call intellectual architecture. In classical scholarship, especially theological scholarship, every single word on the cover is a signpost.
It's not just decoration.
Not at all. They telegraph the book's specific genre, its level of authority, and its relationship to the wider body of religious knowledge. We have to treat this cover as a meticulously designed map.
Okay, let's unpack this. So stepping into the visual information first. The cover is, it's immediate and powerful. It looks ornate, dignified, and it's got this bold, gold Arabic calligraphy right in the center.
It's designed to command respect.
But if we look a little closer at the more practical markers, you can see the publishing imprints down at the bottom. We see Dar al-Aqeedah and Maktabat al-Ulum wal-Hikam. What does a publisher named House of Creed and Library of Sciences and Wisdom immediately tell us about the product they're trying to sell?
Well, it tells us that the book is highly specialized and rigorously serious, Dar al-Aqeedah. It translates literally to House of Creed or House of Doctrine.
The House of Creed, that's pretty direct.
It is. It immediately places the text strictly within the discipline of foundational beliefs, of theology, of Aqeedah. That's an editorial choice that just filters out every other genre.
So this isn't a book on, say, poetry or manners or even general history.
Absolutely not. It is a text devoted solely and explicitly to defining the boundaries of correct theological thought. The publisher's name is a content warning and a promise, all in one.
So if they are the House of Creed, they're basically in the business of publishing materials that define what is and what is not central to the belief system.
Precisely. It signals to the reader right away that this content is definitive, it's systematic. And then you have the second imprint, Maktabat al-Ulum wal-Hikam, the Library of Sciences and Wisdom.
Right.
That reinforces this positioning, but it adds another layer, a layer of intellectual rigor.
How so?
Because the contents are being framed not just as devotional ideas, but as systematic, categorized knowledge, a formal science ulum that imparts definitive wisdom, or hikam.
So it's not just faith, it's faith as a science.
Exactly. This removes any ambiguity. This text is being presented as an authoritative educational work. It's meant to establish and defend fundamental truths. And it's designed for study and for transmission.
That sets the expectation immediately then, before you've even read a word. We aren't looking at some introductory pamphlet here.
Yeah.
We are looking at a foundational textbook that claims to offer essential, categorized knowledge. And that clarity of structure, which we know our listener is often seeking, is encoded right there in the publisher's name.
And it also speaks to the high stakes of the discipline itself. In this tradition, defining belief is considered the most critical intellectual exercise because all subsequent actions and practices flow directly from it.
Everything depends on it.
Everything.
Yeah.
So the institutional commitment you see reflected in those publishing names, it just confirms the seriousness, the gravitas that's given to a text like this.
Okay, so that's the institutional frame. Let's pivot from that endorsement to the central concept of the title itself, Aqidah. For anyone trying to grasp the internal logic of this theological system, understanding this one word feels, well, Essential.
It's the absolute starting point.
What is the fundamental concept of Aqidah in Islamic thought?
The depth of it really starts in the language itself. The word Aqidah is derived from the Arabic triliteral root, ein qafdal.
Okay.
And linguistically, this root is incredibly powerful. It carries the primary meaning of to tie firmly, to knot, or to contract.
To tie a knot.
Exactly. Imagine taking two ropes and binding them together with a strong, complex knot, the kind of knot that is intended to be permanent and completely unshakable. That's the image you should have in your mind.
So this is far beyond just a belief or an opinion. It implies an absolute, non-negotiable mental or spiritual contract, something that's been tied down.
That's it, exactly. The theological implication is that Aqidah signifies an intellectual and spiritual conviction that is so thoroughly integrated, so knotted into a person, that it forms the unshakable bedrock of their entire existence.
Oh, wow.
It is the definitive set of essential tenets of faith. If you think of, say, any philosophical system, this is the core premise, the thing that cannot be abandoned or modified without destroying the entire structure.
This insistence on an unshakable foundation, a knot that won't come undone, that makes perfect sense for a system that's trying to define identity. But okay, where does this creed stand relative to the practical guidance we often associate with religious life? You know, things like prayer schedules or charity rules.
And that is the vital distinction that a text like Aqidat al Mu'min exists to clarify. It's a fundamental division. The entire body of religious knowledge is often systematically categorized into two main fields.
Two fields?
Yes. First, you have Aqidah, which is the realm of beliefs, conviction, dogma, the internal world. And second, you have Fiqh, which is the realm of jurisprudence, practical law, and acts of worship, the external world.
Okay, so Fiqh is the detailed instruction manual for behavior, how you act, while Aqidah is the foundational operating philosophy behind it all.
Precisely. Fiqh governs the how to perform the ritual ablution, how to calculate the religious tax, or zakat, how to conduct a business partnership, all the minute details of family law. But Aqidah dictates the why.
The motivation.
The why, and more importantly, for whom you are doing it. It's what ensures the purity of your intention, the proper understanding of the divine. Without a correct Aqidah, the actions governed by Fiqh are seen as meaningless or even invalid.
That makes me wonder about the priority then. For the learner who's seeking a rapid understanding of the system, is it more important to grasp the thousands of rules of Fiqh or the relatively fewer but intensely complex points of Aqidah?
Well, the consensus, which this book's title explicitly endorses, is that Aqidah is paramount. It comes first. The belief must be pure and sound before the action can be accepted by God.
The why has to be correct before the how matters.
Think of a simple legal example outside of ritual, a contract between two parties. That's a matter of Fiqh, of law. But if one of the parties fundamentally believes that their signature, the knot of the contract, can be undone simply by wishing it away,
Then the whole system collapses.
the entire legal system collapses. The belief in the binding nature of the contract, the Aqidah, must precede the signing of the document, the Fiqh.
That's a very clean analogy.
Mm.
So in theology, the system is saying you must first define the nature of God, the role of messengers, the reality of the afterlife, all these big questions.
All of them.
Only when that entire metaphysical framework is firmly knotted down can you properly execute the physical acts of worship and interaction.
And it allows the learner seeking clarity to prioritize. Instead of being completely overwhelmed by the complexity of daily rules and regulations.
Which can be daunting.
Extremely. A systematic Aqidah text provides a clear map. It focuses on the 6 key articles of faith: belief in God, in his angels, his revealed books, his messengers, the day of judgment, and divine decree.
It defines the core intellectual boundaries of the faith.
It does. And if the author is calling this the creed of the believer, with the definite article, the, he's implying a universally applicable sort of non-sectarian distillation of these necessities. He's aiming for a doctrinal consensus.
And this structural clarity is a huge part of the appeal. It prevents the theological landscape from feeling like this disorganized mass of rituals and rules. It imposes a disciplined, systematic order onto belief itself.
And you have to remember, the existence of these comprehensive creedal texts stems from historical necessity. As the faith expanded geographically, as new cultures introduced different philosophical questions.
From Greek logic, for instance.
Exactly, from Greek logic to Persian dualism. Scholars felt they had to systematize and codify the native beliefs to defend them against these intellectual challenges, and also to ensure internal uniformity across vast distances. So this book promises not just belief, but defended belief.
It sounds like the defensive walls of the system. You knot down the core principles, and then you build the defenses against anything that tries to unknot them.
Precisely. And that leads us directly to what must be the most important element inside those walls, which is the central declaration that's visible right on the cover.
Right. Let's move to the heart of the design. The title sets the genre for us, Creed. But dominating the cover, inside all that elaborate, dignified ornamentation, is the bold, central inscription. The Shahada, the Declaration of Faith.
This is the visual proof, the visual confirmation that the entire work is dedicated to this one statement. The Shahada isn't just one belief among many. It is the entryway. It's the first pillar of Islam.
So by putting it front and center,
by placing it center stage visually, it confirms that the creed of the believer is fundamentally a deep, systematic exploration of the meaning and the implications of this single, succinct sentence.
Okay, let's break down the two inseparable phases of the Shahada as they're presented there, starting with a declaration of God's oneness.
The first, and arguably the most consequential phrase is, Ikachesach, la ilaha illallah.
There is no God but God.
Or, a bit more accurately, there is no deity worthy of worship except Allah. This phrase is the definitive articulation of Tawhid.
Tawhid, the cornerstone. It means oneness, but we know it encompasses so much more than just simple numerical monotheism. For a deep dive like this, we really need to understand the different theological layers of Tawhid that this text would be obligated to explore.
Absolutely. Aqeedah texts systematically organize Tawhid to ensure no ambiguity remains, to ensure the purity of the belief. The structure is almost universally divided into three categories.
Three categories, okay.
It starts with the broadest assertion of control over the entire cosmos. Tawhid ar-Rububiyyah, the oneness of lordship.
Oneness of lordship. What does that specifically entail beyond just God is the creator?
Well, it's the assertion that God alone is the creator, the sustainer, the provider, the giver of life and death, and the regulator of the universe. The implications of this are both cosmic and ethical.
So for the believer, accepting Rububiyyah means what?
It means rejecting the idea that anything in creation, be it physical forces, human systems, natural elements, is independently responsible for existence or survival. Everything is managed by a single, unified divine will.
That has profound implications for your worldview. It immediately challenges any kind of purely materialist explanation of the universe. I mean, if you attribute ultimate power or causality to nature or to a random chance, you risk violating Rububiyyah.
Exactly right. It mandates a singular lens for viewing causality. So when rain falls, the natural process of condensation is acknowledged, of course.
Sure, science of it.
But the ultimate intentional cause is God's decree. The text would spend a significant amount of time distinguishing between immediate physical causes and ultimate metaphysical causality. It's about anchoring the believer's understanding of destiny and provision in the divine. It's really the highest philosophical concept, a singular existence managing all affairs.
So that sets the whole metaphysical stage. But if we accept that singular control, what is the immediate practical day-to-day consequence of that belief? That has to transition us into the second layer.
It does, flawlessly. And this second layer is really the primary subject of the Shahada's first half, Tawhid al-Uluhiyyah, the oneness of worship.
The oneness of worship.
This is the practical consequence of Rububiyyah. If God is the sole creator and sustainer, then it follows logically that only he is worthy of worship, of devotion, and of absolute submission.
This sounds like the layer that governs all those acts of fiqh we're just discussing.
It is. It's the bridge. This category requires the author to meticulously outline all acts of worship, prayer, sacrifice, supplication, seeking refuge, vowing, placing trust, and to assert that these must be directed only toward God.
So the book is dedicated to protecting this purity.
Yes, protecting it against shirk, which is polytheism or associating partners with God. It's meant to ensure that no part of the believer's devotion, not even small internal acts like, say, relying on luck or superstition, is misdirected.
Given the historical context of all the theological disagreements, how meticulously does a text like this have to define and protect uluhiyyah? This category must become the most controversial battleground. right, requiring immense detail.
It absolutely does. The rigor of an Aqidah text is often judged by its precision right here.
Yeah.
And it's not just about avoiding idols made of wood or stone, the obvious things.
Right, it's more subtle.
It's about ensuring that devotion, intercession, and reliance are not placed on saints or graves or even figures of authority who are themselves created beings. This section of the book would contain detailed arguments on the spiritual consequences of violating the singular focus, reinforcing the concept that the action is void if the intention is compromised.
The cover's ornamentation, that gold calligraphy, it really does suggest the immense value placed on this kind of detailed, definitive protection of singular worship. But there's a third layer, isn't there? One that moves into more abstract intellectual territory, the nature of God himself.
Precisely. Tawhid al-Azma was sifat, the oneness of names and attributes. This deals with affirming the names and attributes that God has revealed about himself in Scripture, like the all-hearing, the almighty, the merciful,
Okay.
while at the same time avoiding 4 key intellectual traps.
And what are those theological traps? This is where the technical nuance for our informed listener really comes in.
Historically, scholars identified 4 critical errors when dealing with divine attributes. The first is tatil, which is negation or denial of the attribute altogether.
It's just saying it doesn't exist.
Yes. The second is tamthil, which is likening the attribute to created things. For example, claiming God's knowledge is exactly like human knowledge.
Okay, anthropomorphism.
In a way, yes. The third is takif, which means speculating on the how of the attribute. For instance, trying to imagine the physical reality of God's hand, which is mentioned in Scripture.
Trying to explain the unexplainable.
And the fourth is tadarif, which is distortion or interpretation, where the literal meaning is changed without any scriptural evidence to back it up.
That sounds like an extremely delicate philosophical balancing act. This text, then, it must adopt a very specific, rigorous methodology to handle attributes like the hand or the face that are mentioned in Scripture without falling into either making God too human-like or, on the other hand, just empty rationalization.
It has to. It solidifies a methodology. And given al-Jaza'iri's known intellectual currents, this text very likely adopts the methodology of Tawhid, which is delegating the knowledge of the how to God, or the methodology that affirms the attributes exactly as they were revealed, without asking how.
So you accept the text, but you don't speculate on the mechanics.
Exactly, thereby avoiding those 4 traps. This emphasis is a huge historical marker. It differentiates this type of creed text from those written by more rationalist schools of theology, like the Mu'tazila, who attempted to interpret the attributes allegorically to maintain what they saw as God's absolute transcendence.
That distinction is crucial. It tells the reader that this book isn't just defining belief. It's defining the methodology for how you should think about God. It's aligning itself with a specific school of tradition that privileges textual affirmation over rational speculation in this area.
Yes. The systematic treatment of these 3 layers, lordship, worship, and attributes, is the intellectual core of the entire book.
And all of that is packed into the first half of the Shahada.
And that leads us seamlessly to the second half, which is equally vital. It's what links this abstract, rigorous monotheism to human history and practice.
The second phrase, O Yunyo Yosh, Muhammadun Rasul Allah. Muhammad is the messenger of God. Why is the inclusion of this prophetic link non-negotiable for a foundational creed text?
Because the first part establishes the who God, and the second part establishes the how, the mandated methodology for knowing and worshiping the who.
The channel for the information.
The only channel. If Tawhid is the absolute truth, then the Prophet Muhammad is the indispensable, divinely authorized transmitter of that truth. The idea is that God's will is not meant to be deciphered through human reason alone, nor is worship supposed to be invented. It must be learned from the certified messenger.
So the book isn't just about believing in God in the abstract. It's about accepting the necessary vehicle for guidance. The book, therefore, must dedicate considerable space to defining the prophet's authority, his infallibility in transmitting the message, and the obligation to follow his example, the Sunnah.
Precisely. This section of any Aqidah text would outline why the prophet is trustworthy, the miracles that affirmed his prophethood, and why adherence to his model is the sole legitimate interpretation of God's will.
I see.
Without this second part, the rigorous purity that was defined by Tawhid al-Uluhiyya, the oneness of worship, cannot be practically implemented or verified. It's the practical application of the abstract truth.
It's a complete system. The cover, just to the Shahada, presents a definitive mission statement. He says, This book will explore singular divine authority and the necessity of following the prophetic path to understand and implement that authority.
And the ornamental gold, the dignified design, it all confirms the reverence and authority of this intellectual mission. It promises a complete, systematic, and dignified theological framework.
Which is exactly what a learner-seeking structure would prioritize.
It's
Okay, so now we shift from the content to the source of the authority. The name on the cover is Abu Bakr al-Jaza'iri. When you're dealing with foundational texts like this, the author's identity isn't just a byline. It's a guarantee of a certain intellectual lineage and a methodological alignment.
The author is absolutely central to evaluating the text's reliability and its perspective. Abu Bakr al-Jaza'iri, the name al-Jaza'iri itself means the Algerian.
Be Algerian.
Yes, and that immediately connects the universal subject of creed to a specific geographic and scholarly lineage. This practice of naming scholars by their origin is deeply rooted in the history of Islamic scholarship. It signifies a known, traceable chain of knowledge transmission.
So you know where he's coming from, literally and figuratively.
You do. But beyond geography, what does his role as the author of the Creed of the Believer tell us about his scholarly function, especially in the context of, synthesizing such complex doctrine? It reveals he functions primarily as a synthesist and a pedagogue, a teacher.
A teacher.
The field of Aqeedah is vast. It contains centuries of intricate debates, responses to philosophical challenges, theological controversies. It's a huge body of literature. A foundational text like this one, intended for the general believer rather than just for specialized scholars, necessitates a scholar who can filter all that, simplify it, and codify this complexity into accessible yet authoritative language.
That requires immense credibility. The author has to be able to navigate all those historical debates, the tensions over the divine attributes, the controversies over free will, and then present a consolidated, definitive position without oversimplifying the source material to the point of error.
He has to have the authority to act as a definitive summarizer, and that's key. This text is not proposing a new theory. It is a restatement and a clarification of established doctrine. Furthermore, al-Jaza'iri is associated with a specific, generally traditionalist approach to theology, one that emphasizes relying heavily on the transmitted texts, or ithar. That means the Qur'an and the authentic Sunnah. And it means avoiding the kind of innovative rationalist interpretations that emerged in later periods.
That's the technical detail our informed listener needs. It places the book within a specific intellectual current. If we know his approach favors traditional texts, we can infer, for example, how he'll handle those difficult topics, like the names and attributes we just discussed.
Exactly. We can deduce that his method will be clear, direct, and focused on textual proof rather than extended philosophical analogy. This book serves a crucial function. It acts as a bulwark against confusion. It provides a singular, focused perspective on orthodox belief for the masses in an era where information and misinformation is just so abundant.
For the learner who's seeking the most efficient shortcut to foundational knowledge, this is invaluable.
It is.
It's an accredited, synthesized summary, vetted by publishing houses that are dedicated to doctrinal clarity. Reading this is far more structured than trying to tackle the original, dense primary sources of early Islam on your own.
And this pedagogical role is key. The title itself suggests the book is structured for clarity. It might employ, say, a question-and-answer format or clear categorical divisions. These are ideal for teaching and memorization. The structure itself is a tool designed to implant this knot of conviction firmly in the mind of the adherent.
So the author's legacy is really tied to this idea of clarity and definition.
Mm-hmm.
He's making the complex simple, but without losing the technical purity of the doctrine.
Yes, and that ensures the belief system remains cohesive across diverse populations who are not all trained theologians.
Right.
It speaks to the organizational power of scholarship. Defining a religion for millions of people requires structure, clarity, and the backing of an established scholarly authority, which al-Jaza'iri provides by taking on the mantle of defining the creed.
Okay, so we've covered the structure of the belief and the source of its authority. Now let's go back to the target audience, which is hinted at by that simple yet profound title, The Creed of the Believer. It's not a treatise for scholars or an inquiry for theologians. It's pitched directly toward the individual adherent. What does this singular focus on the individual tell us about the required application of this doctrine in daily life?
The book's focus is clearly on the integration of belief into the lived experience, the psychological and the practical internalization of the system. Aqidah is the theoretical engine that powers all the actions of fiqh. The title implies that this text is intended to mold the identity of the individual adherent completely.
If fiqh provides the blueprint for rituals, how does Aqeedah practically guarantee the validity of those rituals? We touched on intention earlier, but let's go a bit deeper. Can you give a real-world application?
Let's consider not just a ritual act like prayer, but a social act, something like giving charity or helping the poor. Fiqh defines how much you must give and when you should give it. But Aqidah dictates why you are giving it and to whom the ultimate reward is ascribed.
The internal dimension.
Right. So if a person gives charity primarily to gain social status or to get praise from other people, even if the money is given perfectly according to the rules of fiqh,
The act is empty.
the act is considered void of spiritual reward. Because the intention, the Aqidah regarding uluhiyah, the oneness of worship, is corrupted by associating partners with God in seeking praise.
That's a critical distinction. It means the creed acts as a quality control mechanism for every single physical action. The external act is secondary to the purity of the internal motive, which the creed is there to define.
Absolutely. The creed is there to ensure that all human endeavor is ultimately dedicated to the singular purpose of serving God. And this transforms even mundane actions into acts of worship, simply through the purity of the underlying intention.
Beyond actions, we noted that Aqidah texts shape the entire worldview by addressing these big metaphysical questions. We have to give some time to the complexity of divine decree and free will, because this text is guaranteed to address that. How does a foundational creed reconcile these seemingly conflicting concepts for the everyday believer?
This is perhaps the most profound intellectual challenge any Aqidah text faces. The problem of Qadar, divine decree, or destiny and ikhtiyar, which is human free choice.
The age-old paradox.
It is, and historical theological schools fought intensely over this. If God has decreed everything, then where does human accountability lie? But if humans have absolute free will, how can God be all-powerful?
The learner seeking clarity needs a clear, structured answer to this paradox, not just an acknowledgement that the debate exists.
And the Aqidah text, particularly one from a traditionalist current like al-Jaza'iri's, typically adopts a position that maintains both truths without trying to resolve them fully through rational analogy.
So it holds them in tension.
It does. It affirms God's ultimate knowledge and comprehensive decree. That's the rububiyyah part, meaning everything that happens is by his will. And simultaneously, it affirms human choice and responsibility, meaning the believer is held accountable for the choices they actively make.
So it asserts a truth that must be believed, even if the precise mechanism of their reconciliation remains a mystery to the human intellect. The creed requires you to believe in both the grand cosmic control and your own personal immediate responsibility.
Exactly. It provides the believer with an essential functioning theology. You get peace through the knowledge of destiny, and you get motivation through the reality of choice. This unified concept provides profound psychological stability. It gives answers to existential angst about suffering, about success, about the meaning of life. The book acts as a comprehensive operating system, providing the necessary drivers to interpret all of reality.
And that concept of stability is vital. In a complex, fast-moving world, a text that explicitly promises foundational certainty is highly attractive. How does a text on creed operate as a social and intellectual anchor in a diverse global context?
It acts as the minimal common denominator. For a global community that spans all these disparate cultures, languages, and political systems, the Aqidah is the non-negotiable core that unifies them.
It's the one thing everyone has to agree on.
Yes. While practical law, fiqh, might differ significantly across regions, reflecting local customs, different schools of thought, environmental factors, the foundational creed must remain singular and uniform.
It's the constant, regardless of the local variables.
It establishes the basis for identity and for inclusion. To be a believer in the sense of the book's title, you must tie this essential knot. It draws a clear boundary between orthodox adherence and what would be considered theological innovation, or bid'ah. The text explicitly maps out what is not acceptable, what would unknot the conviction, thereby protecting the community's identity from internal drift and external pressure.
So, what does this all mean? It means the mere existence of a codified creed of the believer confirms the priority placed on fundamental, unified beliefs over the diversity of legal rulings when it comes to establishing that religious identity.
The message is crystal clear. First, ensure the foundational knot is tied correctly, systematically, and purely according to the defined path. Everything else, all actions, all laws, builds upon that. And this book promises to provide that unshakable foundation for the individual.
Okay, so the analysis of this cover is complete. We've decoded the institutional seriousness of the publishers, the non-negotiable definition of belief as Aqidah, the core theological commitment found in the Shahada.
Especially those three layers of Tawhid we discussed.
Right, and the functional authority of the synthesizing author, Jaza'iri, who guides the believer to a unified, systematic worldview.
Our deep dive into this singular piece of source metadata really confirms that in the world of religious knowledge, the cover is the contract. We have, I think, effectively charted the contents of the creed of the believer. We recognize it as a systematic articulation of orthodox identity, designed to provide clarity, structure, and foundational certainty for the individual adherent across a global community.
And we saw how the book promises to address the highest philosophical concepts, like causality and free will, while at the same time governing the purity of the most intimate day-to-day actions, like giving charity. The author steps in as the definitive scholarly authority, compiling centuries of debate into a single accessible roadmap for you.
Understanding any complex system, whether it's an economic theory, a philosophical school, or a theological tradition, it always starts with identifying its core non-negotiable tenets. This text is the perfect encapsulation of that search for absolute foundational certainty.
And as we always do, we want to leave you with a final thought to mull over. We began this by observing that the entire premise of this deep, comprehensive book is encapsulated by that succinct, powerful sentence displayed right on the cover.
Mhm.
The Shahada. It's something uttered in just a few seconds. Yet this book, The Creed of the Believer, proves that this single truth requires hundreds of pages of rigorous, systematic explanation to fully unpack.
And that raises a profound question, I think, about the nature of conviction itself. How much can the foundational premise of any system, political, philosophical, or religious, be truly contained within that initial simple tie, that powerful knot?
Right.
And when an authoritative scholar like Abu Bakr al-Jaza'iri steps in to write a book-length commentary on that single simple truth, what does that expansion add? Is the expansion merely clarification, or does the very process of systematization, of defense and codification in order to protect the knot? Does it inevitably introduce a layer of complexity and historical baggage that was absent from the original simple unadorned truth?
The relationship between the simple assertion and the expansive doctrine required to live by it. Chew on that. We look forward to diving into the next stack of sources with you.